topics at the last moment and speak to the reemergence of the feminine. He kindly obliged, and we took a deep look at the suppression of women throughout history and the need for the feminine to come to the forefront again for the sake of humanity. Since we last talked, I found it rather interesting in that a lot of the women, a lot of them are very outspoken, some of them are more or less well-known in the alternative media, including friends of mine and myself, are having this experience that something of a very deep and moving nature seems to be surfacing, and it's taking the shape of a type of anger. And I'm realizing it's from a collective connection to a larger consciousness, a memory, if you will. Not that there's not every good reason for women to have some of this bubbling to the surface, but there's been in your work, a concerted effort to make sure that women in particular stay particularly asleep. Can you talk to us just a little bit about, even from an occultist point of view, and some of what goes on in the darkest reaches that most of us don't have awareness of?
Well, women have been suppressed in hundreds of ways for years, and that suppression is not just a physical oppression from outside, it's the implanting of inferior idioms within the consciousness of the female. It also is a misrepresentation of what is femininity in general. We may not even have a clear understanding of what femininity and masculinity are, because a lot of people don't realize there's a huge difference between what is male and female and masculine and feminine, and we'll use those terms interchangeably, which is okay on the street level, but when you're trying to be more technical about it, you get into all sorts of problems. And this is actually a huge thing. I hope that people will think about it, because in fact what you're seeing in the world today are basically people who have murdered their own femininity and masculinity, make up for that fact by the cosmetic industry, who provides simulacras, false personas of masculine and femininity as they have contrived it. People conform to those models, and this is what we have now walking about in society. So very few people today have a good sense of their own masculinity and femininity. You're speaking specifically about women, and that's where I would come in, is that women today have lost all sense of what it is to be feminine. Because in order to even be able to coexist in the world, gain success, they've had to become masculinized. It's been demanded. It may be unspoken, meaning that a person's parents may not sit down and give this as a lecture to the average teenage girl. But society is permeated with that unless you suit up like a guy, unless you cosmetize yourself according to certain models that they put on television, unless you completely have beaten yourself up about your looks, about your complexion, about your height, about your level of intelligence, about your applicability, your intelligence level, your levels of approval, you see. And so now you have girls who are entirely fixated on winning that approval. But of course what happens in society is we often may want something, we may have expectations, we may not get it. So what happens to these adolescents is that they then jump through all these hoops, force their parents to buy them things, conform to what their peer groups are talking about, microanalyze all the media out there in order to fit these preposterous stereotypes, and then not get the very approval from a psychopathic, broken society that was the promissory note.
But isn't it designed to make sure that that approval is never given?
Yes, it is, and that is the crux of then where the neurosis comes in, because when we don't get the approval that we falsely need, I mean, my work ultimately works on why we would even need that approval, but that's another area. Since you do need it, since your whole psychology is geared towards receiving it, you will do two things. One, you will do anything, including self-murder, to get it. You will become a completely attuned, acculturated person, because you feel that I will get it if I jump through these hoops, if I look like the latest model, if my speech is, the way that I speak is born from television lingo, if I mimic, and if I conform. And the other thing is then when you find out that you're not really getting the approval, then comes the inevitable neuroses. And it's at this point when the neurosis sets in that Big Brother is watching. This is what Big Brother's hoping for. He's not really empowered while you're going through the early stages. He is empowered when you start becoming neurotic, because the neurotic individual is far more susceptible to control.
Yes.
This affects women more than men because men historically have been able to out-project or project their anger, because you were talking about anger, and this is all satellite to these emotions. Men have been able to bounce a basketball, kick a football around, have a bar fight, go hunting, go off to war if necessary, kill entire peoples and all the rest of it in order to exercise and expatiate all of this pent-up emotion and anger and so on. The difference is that women have not been allowed to do that historically. They introject. Of course, that now the introjection plays in yet to another Leviathan, which is the big pharma, because when you interject anger, you have skin breakouts, you have bad eyesight, you will have a whole cocktail of other, mostly biological issues, including anorexia, by the way, which is self-hatred expressed outwardly, or bulimia, and all the other cocktail.
It's a slow suicide of sorts.
Well, it is, ultimately. Yes. And then what happens is, Big Brother's watching because he knows that most women, up until now, which brings us to your point, have always been introjecting. But as Freud and Jung always said, you can only repress to a certain extent. You can only interject to a certain extent until the sump gets completely full. Then it's going to explode outwardly, which I don't believe is entirely a bad thing, because of all pathologies, one is just replacing the other, one is slightly less bad than the other. You see, it's all a matter of scale. The thing is, though, that if women, as you're saying, are starting to get either over, they become, the interjection is reaching its end.
Yes.
There is only one avenue left, and that is to start projecting it. I'm in favor of all emotions being accepted, and being, because I have a very healthy, I advocate a healthy relationship with what are mistakenly called darker emotions. They're only darker because you won't look at them. You won't shine the light of consciousness onto them. Now, there's a problem, because if women don't know how to healthily project their anger and these fantastic emotions, which they don't, which is critical, into art, into aesthetics, into sport, into something that's building them up, right? Bringing them in touch with their own creativity. Then, of course, another form of neurosis, another form of pathology will be created, in which it might be some dysfunctionally projected. This has implications for children. This has implications for, just driving down the freeway, more road rage, or, it has sociological implications. But then we have to look at is, why is the sea change happening? There's deeper questions in all of this. It's very good. I always advocate in my work, you shouldn't be okay with injustice. You shouldn't be smiling depressive. If you see things that are broken and corrupt, you should rebel against it. So if that's what's happening, and there is this outpouring of emotion because people are now sick of the cosmetics, the girls are waking up to realize, I'm not going to conform, it's no good, I want to be me. Who am I? I don't want to conform to all my peer groups. I'm not interested in what the media is broadcasting. I sense that it's rotten. Then, if they don't have the bridge to move it over, unfortunately, there's always a gray area between a period of change. And this is very difficult. In fact, we're finding it in a broader context, and I talk about this in my work on 2012, is that in this 13-year countdown cycle to the date of 2012, where there's a massive shift taking place from what might be described, if you permit me to use astrological jargon, from a Saturnian, masculine, patriarchal, phallocratic modality into the more Uranian, Piscean, Plutonic. People who are under the Saturnian, Martian, solar paradigm can't just change overnight, any more than anyone who's addicted to anything can change overnight. So what the person has to deal with, what the addict has to deal with, is this gray area, which is extremely uncanny and very disconcerting. And we don't have any models in our world for that. Shamanic traditions do. They'll guide you through it. They tell you about the wasteland, the wilderness, Moses going through the desert, Theseus going into the underworld, King Arthur going through, when the Grail is missing, the whole land dies and turns to snow, and the knights lose their power and their potency, or Samson losing his hair. There's this gray area that's known in the mythos and known in the fiction, but we don't know anything about it in this fast-paced, hypermanic world. So my message is, be okay with the emotions, be okay with it coming out, realize it's a healing process, but watch out for that gray area where you don't know how to let go of the Martian, solar, Saturnian, and wait to be guided to show you how to adopt that new modality.
Because a lot of women are being drugged right now. That is the opiate. It's psychoactive drugs.
Yeah, and of course that, if you don't mind me saying it, is also very much part of what religion has done.
Yes.
Because we have to learn how to identify the very forces that have kept both men and women in this polarized state. All religion is based on very powerful motifs. For instance, to cut a long story short, the chemical wedding. the supreme androgyny of the nucleation of both masculine and feminine. Not male and female, those are stereotypes.
Right.
Those are biology. But each individual, every man carries within him a woman. This was shown beautifully in the movie Life Force. There's an image of the perfect woman within our minds. In fact, in Celtic mythology, or I should say more correctly, Irish mythology, they personify those archetypes as literally goddesses. They represent the land and the sky, but they also represent a part of a man that he has to unite with. This is why the hair was long. Kings wore long hair. The pharaohs wore their lapels long. The Merovingians, wore the mane of the lion, partly because it was a sign of kingship, but partly because it identified you with the feminine principle. The Native American Indians go through the sun dance and other rituals. Why? To suffer pain that the woman experiences when giving birth. So these rites and rituals are to help you to not only deconstruct the hardened femininity, the hardened masculinity, so that the real chemical wedding can take place. Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all these religions co-opted this, skewed it, so that they then have this marriage ritual, physical marriage ritual, which is an entire parody of the chemical wedding, but they sell it to you in this basically glorified slavery way.
White fluffy dresses.
Yes, and their dresses, their costumery, their regalia, the designs of the churches, the salt water, all of that stuff. And then we find it, you step down a level, and you find that the entire corporate advertising world, the world of the merchants, the mercantile people, have done the same thing. I was showing examples of this in the talk, of how the male and female is portrayed in the movies and also in advertisements. But what's really being talked about there are not these inane stereotypes, but what's behind it. The archetypes of the masculine and the feminine. Because the last thing that these people want is for a person to start doing that holy work. Because the moment that you're taught how to do it yourself, you dispense with religions, you don't need them anymore. Because you realize you are the temple of the truth, the temple of the all of God. But then, another way to look at this problem is to ask the question, what was the woman's duty before the whole thing got skewed? Before she had to conform to these role models to succeed in the Saturnian system. In fact, one could pull out again and say, what was mankind, the whole of humankind's job, if this road, this diversion into technology and anti-natural thought patterns and selfless, this collectivism, say all those pernicious things that we should know about are pernicious, they're false. The question always then is, well then what is man meant to be doing? What is woman really meant to be doing? That question is much easier to answer if you examine women. It's much harder to say what a man's real job is if he's not Arnold Schwarzenegger or Ronald Reagan. But what's behind it? The archetypes of the masculine and the feminine. Because the last thing that these people want is for a person to start doing that holy work. Because the moment that you're taught how to do it yourself, you dispense with religions, you don't.
That is the opiate. It's psychoactive drugs.
Yeah, and of course that, if you don't mind me saying it, is also very much part of what religion has done.
Yes.
Because we have to learn how to identify the very forces that have kept both men and women in this polarized state. All religion is based on very powerful motifs. For instance, to cut a long story short, the chemical wedding. The supreme androgyny of the nucleation of both masculine and feminine. Not male and female, those are stereotypes.
Right.
Those are biology. But each individual, every man carries within him a woman. This was shown beautifully in the movie Life Force. There's an image of the perfect woman within our minds. In fact, in Celtic mythology, or I should say more correctly, Irish mythology, they personify those archetypes as literally goddesses. They represent the land and the sky, but they also represent a part of a man that he has to unite with. This is why the hair was long. Kings wore long hair. The pharaohs wore their lapels long. The Merovingians, wore the mane of the lion, partly because it was a sign of kingship, but partly because it identified you with the feminine principle. The Native American Indians go through the sun dance and other rituals. Why? To suffer pain that the woman experiences when giving birth. So these rites and rituals are to help you to not only deconstruct the hardened femininity, the hardened masculinity, so that the real chemical wedding can take place. Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all these religions co-opted this, skewed it, so that they then have this marriage ritual, physical marriage ritual, which is an entire parody of the chemical wedding, but they sell it to you in this basically glorified slavery way.
White fluffy dresses.
Yes, and their dresses, their costumery, their regalia, the designs of the churches, the salt water, all of that stuff. And then we find it, you step down a level and you find that the entire corporate advertising world, the world of the merchants, the mercantile people, have done the same thing. I was showing examples of this in the talk, you know, of how the male and female is portrayed in the movies and also in advertisements. But what's really being talked about there are not these inane stereotypes, but what's behind it. The archetypes of the masculine and the feminine. Because the last thing that these people want is for a person to start doing that holy work. Because the moment that you're taught how to do it yourself, you dispense with religions, you don't need them anymore. Because you realize you are the temple of the truth, the temple of the all of God. But then, well, another way to look at this problem is to ask the question, what was the woman's duty before the whole thing got skewed? Before she had to conform to these role models to succeed in the Saturnian system. In fact, one could pull out again and say, what was mankind, the whole of humankind's job, if this road, this diversion into technology and anti-natural thought patterns and selfless, you know, this collectivism, say all those pernicious things that we should know about are pernicious, they're false. The question always then is, well then what is man meant to be doing? What is woman really meant to be doing? That question is much easier to answer if you examine women. It's much harder to say what a man's real job is if he's not Arnold Schwarzenegger or Ronald Reagan. If he's not a scientist and a sort of like a hunter.
If he doesn't have a business card.
If he doesn't have, he's not bringing home the meat.
Yeah.
I can't think of what he must be doing. What, sitting under a mushroom and meditating like the Taoists? See, we lose it.
Yeah.
However, we obviously know from anthropologists that the female were the keepers of the wisdom. We know this from Maria Gimbutas and so many other great scholars. So in other words, what's happening, how does this tie into the phenomena you're speaking of in the modern world? Because this Plutonic, or let's say countdown to 2012, whatever tradition you're coming from is different languaging for all of this. What happens if this expatiation of the anger and this outpouring is a cleansing process to get that holy grail, the female, back into her femininity, not as, when we had feminism, as a rebellion against the male.
Yes.
But an integration with a higher form of femininity, which ultimately is a unification with the masculine, see, a spiritual move. I believe that's happening. These changes are Plutonic, and Pluto always goes to the deepest recesses of the being to find what's there, what's growing there. And whatever rank weeds and whatever is not sustainable, it will extract it, clean it off, and find what's precious and replant that.
So that's really the good news about this particular astrological cycle.
If people get with it. If people get with it on a mental level. Otherwise, they're in that gray area we talked about, and they'll get traumatized and then miss out on the guidance. One of the ways in which this is showing itself among young girls is an extreme rebellion, as you were saying, against the advertising, backlash against the advertising industry and the brainwashing to be the superficial feminine, right down to becoming as masculinized as any man. One of the phenomena that is happening even on YouTube is girl fighting. I mean, rough, toughs, punching each other in the face, girl fighting. I mean, this is obviously a somewhat distorted backlash to the phenomena that you're talking about. But I believe that Big Brother knows that this is going to happen. They have their fingers on the pulse of all of these psychic dynamics, and they're ready to create another arena so that you get diverted. You know, they go over here. This is the way you're going to handle it. This happened even when women were forced to wear pants and all. There's good parts of it, bad, but you know, even the cosmetics about getting women away from a healthy sense of masculinity. Then feminism, most of the leading feminists were Fabians, funded and paid to distort femininity in another way with the promise that we're introducing you to it. It was just man hate under another guise. You know,
Aaron Russo said that it was essentially created, it was a Rockefeller agenda to create more people onto the tax rolls, get the women working. Yeah,
Kate Millett was an absolute bona fide psychotic. She spent time in lunatic asylums and stuff like that, you know. She was easily manipulated and stuff into doing what they wanted.
There's something else that comes in about, this would have been in the mid-1960s when some of this was starting to take seed. One of the things I've thought of many times, and you and I talked about this off camera, which is really appalling, is the new Levi's ad. But let's go back to when Levi's really caught on, because I was a young girl in the United States at that time, and I remember exactly when myself and my pod, we were identical, all started wearing Levi's at the same time. This would have been around 1963, 1964. At the same time, there was an agenda that was uncovered that another person gave me. That was it's in the congressional record about the larger, essentially kind of a Marxist agenda that was going to be foisted upon the American people, almost every point of which has already taken place by now. this whole thing about Levi, this utilitarian type of clothing that we're all to stuff ourselves in and do up to this very day, right down to the iconography and the most recent advertisement by Levi. Can you talk about your perceptions of what this utilitarian kind of blue cloth means to us as feminine and masculine?
Well, it sends a message on one level that don't be showy, dress down, be normal, this kind of idea. But like in anything, it's not so much the product.
Yeah.
The product may be good, it may be bad, it may be meaningless. My interest is always this commercial advertising shell that sells anything, be it toothpaste or soap or jeans. I'm worried about the name Levi because I know where that word comes from. I haven't looked into it. It may be legitimate name, Levi Strauss. But the fact that it became a corporate logo, sets it into another field of analysis. In exactly
Tell
the same.
us about that.
Well, Levite.
Levite.
Right? It's the Old Testament. 501 is gematria for phallus, for penis. The most famous genes of Levi's 501.
I should know that. I'd never heard that till now.
Yeah, 501 is gematria, Hebrew gematria for the phallus.
That's what I started wearing. Everyone wore 501s.
Because the woman is being conformed to act like a man.
The flesh of the woman is also at this time being constricted in very harsh cloth and covered, which is really antithetical to our skin.
That's right. But remember, they also think of phallic, you can have a word phallic, which is referring to the genitals themselves. And then you have ichthyphallic, which means any phallic-looking thing.
Yes.
But any phallic-looking thing, like a monument, or the human body. The human body is ichthyphallic. So the clothes that then clothe that body are either going to be a surrogate feminine symbol, which is why the popes and the cardinals wear the feminine robes, it's tied into the same thing, or in daily secular life, you'll see them trying to stuff us into Levi jeans, or women are making that attractive. And all the men in those ads are actually androgynous men. They may look hard-bodied, actually, but they're not, as a matter of fact. The women in the advertisements watching the guy washes Levi's, if you look at the way they filmed that, they're actually having these girls really look into a mirror of who they'd like to be. It's not a real male, it's an image of a male in a girl's mind. So we're into the realm of psychology, you see?
Yes.
And
it's very androgynous.
It's very deep.
The latest ads are extremely androgynous.
Sure they are.
And there is the push toward violence. There's the half-sunken, half-submerged sign, America blinking in and out, and neon sign. I don't know if you've seen this one, with Walter, famous poet, rebel poet, Walt Whitman, supposedly an old wax seal of
America,
his voice.
And it's all these black and white
Yes.
images. Yeah, God, what a horrible... How dare they even use that man's poetry in that context?
Oh.
But don't even get me started.
He's got to be rolling over.
Don't even get me started on how they use not only a false nostalgic, pseudo-nostalgic, Spielberg-esque, black and white images of a golden glowing America, which never existed. Don't get me started on how they use classical music and debauch it to sell soap or toothpaste or some nonsense. How they use femininity, decapitated women, animals, nature, the rest of it. Glorified images of grandparents sucking toffees with a little kid in the rocking chair. Did this ever happen? Are we in the world of the living and the sane? No, but we're in the realm of Hollywood and Madison Avenue, in which even, well, why do you think that Spielberg's, in umpteen movies that he's made, keeps referring not only to these fake nostalgic images of the past, like he does this constantly in Indiana Jones and even in other films that he's done. He's very retro in his movies. He will even have images in his movies of other movies. In Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls, his partner turns up on a Harley dressed like Marlon Brando.
Yep.
Does anybody notice what is going on in this ridiculous thing? I saw another movie, I think it was Demolition Man, in which the female cop, lieutenant, they're all retro because they're so future that they have the quaint, they listen to these little jingles on the radio. It's an interesting film. And they have these quaint romantic interests in the past. But actually on a subtextual level, when she takes the Sylvester Stallone character into her office while they're looking on the computer or something, in the background are posters of Die Hard. And in that same movie, Demolition Man, when Sylvester Stallone character and the lady cop are driving in her car, she says that in the past, Arnold Schwarzenegger became the president. And they have this little weird scene about, you kidding me?
Yeah.
So again, another in-movie reference in a movie.
Yes.
And people think that's Hollywood is cool. No, it's not. That is saying that you have now entered the world of reality TV, meaning TV has become your reality. Reality doesn't exist. I was up in Trafford Mall. I talked in Bath in March of this year, 2010, and then I went with a friend up to Manchester. The biggest spectacle up there now is this gargantuan mall. He goes, you got to see this because you're in the symbol.
Seen it.
You know, and he's telling me you got to see this because you're just going to believe it in symbolism. It's got every Greek god that the mind could dream up.
In Manchester?
Yeah, in Manchester, at a place where, you know, the Manchester United football team used to play, Trafford. Well, they built this palace of Versailles. And here you go, schlepping up with your shopping bags, and you look like you're going up the gardens of Versailles Palace. And you walk in, and there's immense chandeliers. You've got spiral staircases in marble. Everything is just plants and goddesses and weird occult phrases and solar discs and ram's head and Bacchus and hearts, Christian red heart of Jesus. And I've got photographs. I took meticulous photographs of all of this. And I'm not even including the architecture itself, or the fact that the murals, or the names of the shops. We're leaving that out. We're just talking about floor design, mosaics, gods and goddesses, Kabbalism. What's this all about? Half the people in it having the foggiest idea about Greek and Latin, Greek and Roman gods, and yet here they are in a palace. Why? It's to make your little hovel, sitting in your home, a secondary home. We don't want you to be at home in that little box that we've given you. Come and drink coffee in this beautiful palatial place. Do you know that they even had gazebos inside? Did you know that they had a ship motif with a band playing on the stage, as if you're out on the ocean on a cruise? Then at night, in the daytime, the roof is clouds. As evening falls in real time, real life, stars come out inside the mall. So in other words, these people have said... It's
kind of like Las Vegas, the Paris. And,
yeah, I think they've got this. It was the first time I've ever experienced this. I'm blown away. And that we sat there and observed.
It's disorienting.
Yeah. And what it's really doing is saying, forget reality, forget nature. We're making a facsimile of it. The Taco Bell looked like Tutankhamun's, no, I'm not joking here. They had a Mayan design on like Pizza Hut or something like that. I've got the photographs. Everything was designed on temples and spiritual things. They had the Mayan calendar, they had Quetzalcoatl, they had Horus, they had the Pepsi and Coke machines and the toilets designed like the temple at Dendera. I'm not joking you. And everybody is swimming around in this place, inwardly sort of partly liking the euphoria, partly turned on because it's spiritual. I mean, you got pictures of Hathor and Isis on the wall. It is spiritual. And it's alluring to one aspect of your mind, but it's deeply disturbing to another because it's not the real thing. It's not holy. It's just food and garbage. It's there. So this creates this great inner schism. And again, coming back to a more primitive level, you don't want to be at home. You can come and eat here. You can walk around. You can take your girlfriend out. You can sit and listen to the band. You can watch the stars change. The clouds will come out. And suddenly, you prefer the simulacra better. Jean Baudrillard, the French philosopher, said that's exactly what's going to happen. As man surrounds himself with more plastic, as he takes his kids around Toys R Us and just has all these gizmos and gadgets and robots and cyborgs, and his TV has a million remote controls and blueberries and blackberries and whatever, you will become as artificial as the world that surrounds you, which is what's happening now. I said at the talk, conversation is a dead art. You ask somebody, is anybody sitting in the seat, and they think they look at you as if you're just falling out of the sky.
Right.
And start fidgeting.
You've offended them.
They're afraid, and they're fidgeting with a gadget. Because anybody they talk to or look at has to be through the means of a impersonal gadget. There's no such thing as a conversation person to person anymore. It has to be by way of some technical device. How does this tie into the feminism? I showed a picture of a woman, the typical cyborg. It was one of these so-called pop singers, and I use that in as loosest possible connotation. Beyonce or whoever it might have been. Who's the blonde who's all famous now, this hideous monstrosity that loves really blood and death so much?
Who is it?
Gaga. Lady Gaga, half cyborg, half herself, so to speak. And I tried to analyze this for the audience. I said, what is that really showing? What do these images show? Does it not show the whole thing that's happening in our society today, in which the feminine has been, as we talked about what was woman meant to be? Well, I'll tell you what woman is. Woman is a threat. Woman has always been a threat. Woman is higher on the ontological ladder than man because she gives birth as the gods give birth. Gods give birth to the human race, but woman gives birth to man. So man is below woman in that sense that he can't give birth. Technology is his way to rival the female power of giving birth. Woman, therefore, has always been a threat, what she represents. Now, the individual woman's threat is minuscule, but archetypally, racially, over the millennia that we've lived, the archetype of the female, which Jung named anima, and there's other languaging for this, becomes a very, very demonic and threatening thing to the hardened masculine who will do anything but integrate. She's not only a threat, she's a mysterious female. Right? The book of Tao Te Ching says she is the mysterious female, the everlasting female. This mystery is the secret of it all. The mystery, which is nature ultimately, is impenetrable to man. It's what's called in scientific lingo negentropic. They can't find the plug-in switch. How does the sun rise? How do the clouds pass? How does this tree grow out of mud? How does this tree grow out of mud and become that? Where's the switch? So science is looking for the switch to find the secret of the power of nature. Nature is negentropic, which means self-sustaining, everlasting, without life, without death. The masculine, hardened, perverted, psychopathic mind wants the secret of that power. It ties into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein things and things we can't have time to explore. It's a very well-known motif in the Gothic horror fiction genre. Since they can't find it, and since they're ontologically lower than women on the ontological scale, their technology is their way of rivaling the female, and they're saying since the female is uncontainable, unknowable, impenetrable, we will create the cyborg technology version of the female because that's programmable, that's understandable, that's just circuits. Watch us, create all humanity in this, and we'll create the housing project, which is the global village for this. So what is happening on the archetypal level, on the higher level, is the death of femininity and the continuing war against the female, technology being the weapon that has constantly been used, age upon age, to rape her of her ultimate power, right? Okay, Michael, is that fatalistic? Is it all over? Are we done for?
No, there's something else rising.
Right, because the thing is that very need to upscale the weaponry shows you that something else is taking place.
It's in response to something.
It shows you that that the other is about to make its presence known. What it also means is that all this other stuff. Remember we talked about the girls getting sick of the cosmetics and
yes.
sick of what TV is giving. Then on another level, on this higher level, even part of us is getting sick of the simulacra. Because an idea of reality can only last a certain amount of time. We talked on a previous interview and we mentioned that evil has within it the seeds of its own destruction.
Yes.
Anything corrupt, unjust is bound to fail, is bound to crumble. We're in that very age now. So all this new machinations and moving and saber rattling and all these new machinations of the dictators is because they know that the ground from under them is changing. If we don't realize that, we lose hope and they win again. You see, so what we have to realize is that the forces of nature can never be defeated. They literally are negentropic. There is no on switch. That only exists in the ego. That's the ego world, and that's the world of the technology that has on and off buttons and controllable components and programmable components because of this ancient. And goodness knows that there's a whole other question of even how ancient it is. But even leaving that aside, an ancient antipathy, not between male and female, as it has been. I'll go easy. I'll say somewhat misguidedly represented in front of us. The war has been between masculine and feminine, which is within each of us. It's not just a polarized thing at all, and it's to suspend or permanently delay the ultimate chemical wedding, which is the reason why we exist. Man on this planet, Aristotle called it entelechy, the natural movement of this to that. When you plant a potato, it becomes a potato, not a daffodil. When you plant an oak, it becomes an oak, not an elm. Within the potentiality, the seed is the end. And he used the Greek word entelechy, to say in the seed is its final goal. It's the fractal people know all about this. They've worked it out now, right? So the thing is that also psychologically, biologically, and humanly, it's the same. Within the human being is the God. Within the human being is the Buddha. Within the human being is the enlightened one, the magus, the wizard, the great one, the high one, the elder. And whether you like it or not, and no matter how many boulders you put on top of it, no matter how many dead ends you go down, no matter how many distractions you get into, and this was brought out beautifully in the movie Zardoz by John Boorman, no matter how much technology you build, no matter how many walls, no matter how many vortexes, no matter how many lies, no matter what you do, that entelechy is going to continue. And no matter what kind of psychic dictatorship, global village, silicon revolutions you create, you cannot stop that process because it's way deeper than thought. It's way deeper than mind.
It's deeper than emotion. It's something that is emoting
absolutely.
the emotion.
These are only the branches and flowers of something infinitely deeper. Heidegger put it this way. He said that thinking is one step later than being. You have to exist before you can think. I mean, in one way it's a no-brainer. But unfortunately, even the greatest philosophers spent hundreds of years trying to work and they never got there. And then he said, then reason, which is an attribute of thought, is one step later again. So how can reason, and how can even thinking, know the mysteries of being? It's like a 3-year-old knowing its mother has a personality and a love life and a youth and all these interests. The child is incapable of understanding that. It's just not possible. So all the scientism, all the religions are attempting to use reason, and I'm not against reason, I'm actually an advocate of reason, but within a practical sphere of influence. I also know where reason's limits are.
Yes, and not to the exclusion of the being.
Right. What has happened is that women, men have been forced to conform to very impractical forms of reason, and to split. Then we have another split: reason and emotion, or mind and heart. Once you've started one dualism, it just keeps going forever until you come back to these fundamental understandings. So getting back to what we were talking about, this negentropic intellectual movement cannot be altered. Big Brother and anyone who buys into that mode of thought, in other words, anyone who shares their psychopathy, is deadly afraid of it. And I'll tell you why. It's because before you can have a chemical wedding, you must experience a chemical divorce. It's the opposite of normal life. First you get married, then you get divorced. Right? This is opposite. In spiritual terms, everything must die before you can inherit her. You're going to meet Shiva before Shakti bothers opening the door.
Right.
Right? The religions go, well, that's a bit of a problem. I know. We'll don ourselves up as Shakti. We'll have all of her trappings.
To somehow bypass that necessary step.
Yes, to create
the illusion that we can bypass that step.
And I believe now that's becoming, it's not my belief, it is becoming unsustainable to everyone, all over the world. And so their gig, they're trying to think, what are we going to do now? We're going to have to sell out and move shop. Oh, Age of Aquarius and Age of Awakening. Oh, damn, we might be out of business soon. So in came the New Age. In comes a bunch of other bogus spinner rack stuff. In will come a regression, like we talked about earlier, to hardened forms of religion. Yes. Because when the softer, more egalitarian form, I'm not all against religion, see, but once the egalitarian models start weakening, there's a fear reaction, and as we've seen.
Go to the safe.
And then you have Big Brother will bring out a champion like a George Bush or an Obama with a big smile on their face and a big stick behind their back to make sure that they egg you on to conform or collectivize in yet another way. My work deals a lot in all these elements that make you collectivize. So the chemical divorce is part of the package of spiritual evolution. Shamans knew this, the elders, the druids knew this. We talked about the druids before. One of their ideologies was that you have to die to everything before she will come to you. Now, who is she going to come to first? Well, she's a she, so I would assume that the feminine is in closer ontological proximity than the masculine. The masculine is going to get it as well, but in this spiritual, I hate to use the word hierarchy, but whatever, in this continuum, the feminine is the most receptive. If you study the 20th card of the tarot, Aeon, it's also called Judgment in the Rider-Waite deck. And if you also pull out card 6, known as the Lovers, you'll see something very interesting. And that is there's 3 figures, a woman, a child, and a man. And each time it's the woman's head who's looking at divinity, and the man is looking at the female. In both of those cards, divinity is either blowing a trumpet or, in other words, bringing down spiritual energy. And in the mountains in the back or whatever, the woman's head is the one above. She is the divine mediator. Remember we said what is it the woman's duty was, etc., etc. She is the mediator or conduit for that knowledge. What has happened since the advent of the patriarchal religions is that's been cut off drastically. They murdered witches, they murdered any elders. In my country and others, they did it. And they stopped that flow. And then let's shift focus again and look at it psychologically. And it brings me right back to what you were talking about. If the female and the feminine, and let's embrace also say the woman, is the conduit for this divine revelation, and it will reach the male, masculine mind. However, the message for this age right now is that the woman first has to fill her own chalice up before she can...
To really truly embody the feminine once again.
Yes, because once you say conduit, well, that's the sort of like a neuter thing. Oh, I'm just a conduit. No. It's a conduit, but first you must be imbued in it first. Mm-hmm. So in other words, women are now the first ones to be tested by guess who? Her. The nameless one. So your anger, the thing that you're noticing in the women is the beginning of women being recalled back. Demeter is calling Persephone out of the underworld. She's saying, remember the job? Stop filing the nails. We got work to do.
Yeah.
Oh, what was that again, right? So the awakening of the feminine, which is the Arthurian, after they find the Grail, the world comes to life again, right? But look at the much death and winter had to go through before they inherited it again. And the chalice is in the keeper of who? 3 maidens, right? So here we go. But I believe that the call goes out to the feminine and includes men. The feminine man is included, right?
Yes.
But to the female as well. Therefore, if the females of the world are found wanting, as they possibly may be, then we have a problem. We have to resolve that issue. That's another thing to look at. But if all goes well and women, because they have it ancestrally, start looking and answering this call, and they're able to work with us, then comes in the kind of energy that is required, you see, to build the roots, the foundation. Pluto excavates and gets rid of all the dirt and all the rubbish and all the nonsense, but then you have something to fill. You have a hole to reseed. That's when that feminine, liquid, natural energy needs to flow. It's not man's job. As I said in the talk, women bring children, boys and girls, into the world. Men prepare the world fit to live in for those children. So we have different roles, different dynamics. Feminism blurred all this on purpose. They made a carrot to make it, and I'm not doubting them. Women did need that level of, empowerment.
Well, there was a strengthening that had to occur.
I've read, I studied them for years. I mean, I'm a big fan of Camille Paglia and people like that. But the thing is that I always sensed that behind it was a deeper, darker agenda.
Yes.
And this, from this dark poison higher up, using certain women who are from these royal families to teach the women give them a carrot, so that ultimately a greater, darker evil could be done, which is to turn off the female from her spirituality, so that she ceases to be this conduit. Because they're ahead of us. They know what's happening. They know what's coming. They know that the Pluto is coming to that energy to excavate, to deconstruct, and then they know that where's that liquid, vital, mercurial, silver energy going to come from, right? This has been spoken about in umpteen films as well. The nucleus of the sun and the moon. There's many ways of languaging this. In the yin-yang symbol, in the white is the black, in the black is the white. A nucleation.
Yes.
Almost saying, well, then what is blackness and what is whiteness? You see, it's an incrediable thing. The whole idea of all magic, all ritual, all yoga, all spirituality was the nucleation. The priests got in. The Buddhists is false. It's all false. It's just masculinization under another name. Hinduism, Christianity. Look at Islam. Look at Judaism. I can show you chapter, line, and verse of their hatred of women, their denigration of the female, and also of the feminine, while they're walking around in flowing robes.
Right.
Interesting,
with the long trying to usurp that role falsely.
Usurping it, absolutely. They did it in the goddess. The Druids were entirely wiped out.
Yes.
Because of this very purpose.
Yes.
In fact, I wish we could get into it. There's many great stories that even predict that this was going to happen. So what now has to be the message is the woman has to learn how to turn inward and embrace and integrate all that dark, allegedly dark energy that they're feeling. They have to marry it.
Yes.
They have to let it flow over them. Own it. Right.
And this includes owning the wildness of that uncertainty, because these feelings have to go to a different level than how they've been integrated before.
Right. But what happens if the architects of control step in and go, no, we know how to canalize it. What we want from you is more man-hate.
That's
Feminism 2.0.
Yes.
Oh, gee, it's going to happen again. What are we going to do, pal? What are we going to do, guys? Then they say, well, we just deflected like we did before. Women blame men. We will now show you the object of your hate. It's your fathers again. It's and then the whole vicious cycle will start again. But more than that, women have learned to hate themselves. As we said, the whole media, the cosmetic stuff, is designed to put these absolutely unbelievably, actually they're psychotic, but on the surface they look gorgeous and wonderful and attractive and famous and glitzy. And then the woman can't meet that model or whatever it is, the false model, and then they beat themselves up. So there's self-sadism there. Like I said, oppression and repression.
Yes.
You're repressing yourself, then there's oppression out there. And all of this is to stave off the real chemical wedding, so that the religions, the corrupt Saturnian, solar, Martian institutions remain as powerful as they've always been.
Go Pluto?
They don't want Pluto. Pluto represents the entire meltdown of their their entire fabric.
So it sounds to me like you're feeling pretty hopeful about this. You're seeing that it's inevitable, that this reversal of everything that has been spun into motion by the architects of control ultimately will have to occur. It's nature. Nature will prevail.
It always does. And as we said, it's part of the mind. It's part of this early trauma that got us to have antipathy to nature. There's so many traditions that have language for this. I've kind of invented a new one, and I refer in my Disciples of the Mysterium work. But really, it's really nothing new. It's coming out of existential psychology of Otto Rank and Erich Fromm and Viktor Frankl, and Freud to a certain extent. And it's just a re-languaging in modern terms of that when man was traumatized in his consciousness, that sort of set the ball of psychopathy rolling, and our civilizations are the product of that psychopathy. And the ego, it's almost like the ego had an evil twin, and that I call mysterium, which is the need to have fictionalized, phantasmagoric images of God, of reality, and so forth and so on. But without even getting into all of that, the essence of the ego, the root of the ego, and certainly the root of this mysterium concept, is antipathy to nature. And it's very simple to understand. When nature erupts around you and destroys everything, we're talking tidal waves, boulders falling from the sky, meteors, I can take you and point to them, even they're in Ireland, the whole landscape was
all of it.
Right, we know that it's there. You know, Carolina, Georgia is just pockmarked with it. There's been devastations on this planet that nobody could ever imagine. Obviously, you participated in that. They weren't just sitting in an easy chair watching it. And in the aftermath of that, which was itself thousands of years, it left such an antipathy that you rose up against us. You know, it's like the myth of hell actually is connected to all this. Siberian mythology says that the Northwest was the lands of the dead, the lands of the specters, the lands of the ghouls. So our race memory is filled with this, and unfortunately, an antipathy to nature itself came with that package. And we are so young. That was only, some people say 50, about 13,000, depend who you're listening to.
Right.
But even if it was 50,000 years ago, that's a blink of the eye historically.
Yes.
So we are not even in the beginning of the recovery of that to that trauma. Meaning that the mysterium's wound, the wound that created the mysterium and the ego, is very raw. The growth of technology comes out of that, the demeaning of the denigration of the feminine, the denigration of nature is all a product of all of this.
In an attempt to control our consciousness, so to speak.
That's what it is. Yeah. Because it's fear, and fear creates defenses. Anxiety.
Fear of the wildness of the natural law.
Inner anxiety.
And by the extension of that, as we started the conversation, the feminine aspect of ourselves represents that same regenerative kind of wildness that there's a need to control.
That's right. The feminine, so-called, is the only part of us, the remnant that's left. It makes the artists, makes the poets, makes the musicians. They're the ones who live on that little twilight zone. You know, like the ones like Roger Waters on The Wall said, they stand near the wall. You know, the little artistes. You know, there are those few who are still sort of ambivalent, and they're a bit sensitive and eccentric and all of that. And I think that, to answer your question of whether I'm optimistic or not, is this. Yes, because we are in the process of healing. We have serious forces that don't want that healing to take place. But given time, and then time has its cycles, the 2012 is an expression of one rite of passage leading to another. You see, just like there was another one of these various astrological periods. These are cusp points. The one that's happening now is global and it's very powerful. It's very powerful because Pluto is directly involved in it, as is the Sun. They know this, so they denigrated recently Pluto to some rock floating in space.
Yes, I've noticed that.
What planet are we on?
Demote the planet if it gives you trouble.
There's a song by Black Sabbath. He said, they'll tell you black is really white, the moon is just the sun at night.
Yeah.
Tomorrow they'll be telling us the sun does, you know, it's the moon, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, Pluto.
That was funny, actually.
But that's an expression of this fear of the plutonic here.
Yes.
Oh, we have no unconscious. I got no dirt. There's no skeletons in my closet. Forget it. Psychology is not important. But you heard it in that version, you know, to say Pluto, and Pluto's Shiva. And you're going to meet Shiva because Shakti's protected. And there's rites and rituals to go through before you enter that. Study all the mythologies, study the Arthurian legends, study the Finn cycle, study the Zen, the trials. We get it easy today. Study all the rites of passage that a neophyte needed to go through before you could even have one modicum of it.
Yes.
Right? I mean, the bards had to memorize thousands of pieces of poetry and history and lineage to perfection, including the pauses of how you pause between the sentences. They had to play the harp till their fingers bled. They had to know the tree, plant the tree, nurture the tree, and cut the wood that made the harp. They had to tune the harp according to the Hertzian frequencies of the planets.
And what do we have to do?
We buy it on eBay. We buy it from Taiwan, right? Ready-made.
But what do we give up that they gained in that process?
We lost our connection to nature, and we lost the fact that death is in life. See, when you have direct participation in anything creative, you die as well as be born. You can't be fooled by some priest who's promising you a bromide after you're dead. Within the space of a breath, you've died. The breath, you die, you're reborn again. When you have an intimate, like farmers, anyone connected to the women, everyone connected to the cycle of nature is intimately aware that life and death is in every breath and every moment. We live in the simulacra where death is just something we don't even need to think about. It's not with us anymore. Just watch, Judge Dredd or Demolition Man or Equilibrium. It's to, I don't want to think those evil thoughts. Give me something to take. Give me an injection. I feel bad today. George Lucas movie, or it was Francis Ford Coppola, THX 1138,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
I feel bad. I'm not feeling good today. Give me more stuff. Give me more drugs. These darker emotions, it's been a massive psychology and misrepresentation. Even the words anger and violence have all been misinterpreted to us, misinformed, misapplied by psychopaths who themselves can't go there, never will, ever. And if I may, I'll give you a small anecdote of why. Sociopaths are known historically to never change, because in order to change, they will have to visit all the pain and suffering they've caused to every single individual that they've harmed. Do you remember in certain mystical traditions, they even make it a rule that you go back and say sorry to the people that you've hurt? It's based on this.
Yes.
Whether it's good or bad, we can argue later. The idea is that the sociopath will feel in the dead of night, after many years of psychology, or whatever, or even 2 seconds of revelation in their car one day. I don't know what the scenario might be. But the sociopath, to change his sociopathic ways, would have to, it's not negotiable, they would have to visit all the suffering they've caused to everyone that they have maliciously hurt and deceived throughout their whole life. Obviously impossible. It never happens.
Tedious process, and one that mathematically the odds are they're not going to do that.
So when we know that, we understand why they stay the way they are. It's too painful.
Yes.
Now, the more aware person is willing to go through it. William Blake said, how can we have gone through hell and emerged unconsumed, right? The shaman knows he has to go through that hell of hells. If you watch the movie Hellboy, there's all these alchemical traditions in this. V for Vendetta, where he purposely puts the girl into the shadow gallery and puts her through this unbelievably painful, deathly, morbid experience so she can be liberated and reinitiated into her, because there's that gray area again. You're not going to get it until you meet V, or Shiva, or the world, or yourself. Or in my tradition, it's Hern, Cernunnos, right? In every tradition we have this being, Merlin, I don't know, who it might be. You're going to meet the shaman. You're going to meet that guide who's going to, lead you through that gate. And even that gate is still a metaphor for something that happens biologically and so forth and so on. But until you go through that divorce, nothing will change. Now, the only thing that makes it different now is that instead of this being some little private thing that you're doing in your life with your teacher, the whole world is having to go through this now.
It's bubbling up through the surface of humanity.
Right. So the whole planet is being given this sort of opportunity to go through this, or at least some stage. I never rule out the individual work. You will always have to do it individually. But many of the levels, and maybe we should be thankful for that even. There's something weird about that. Maybe it's because planet Uranus energy is, Uranus rules groups. So where there's Uranian energy, there will be a collectivism with a small c, movement. I think that these conferences are very much part of that.
Yes. Well, and if it can support the individual, and if it can support the individual going through this experience, yay.
Yeah. So I think there are certain protections and help and guidelines. But remember, the doctor doesn't get into bed with the patient. The person who shows you the map can't walk the landscape for you. And that's the beauty. That's the journey. So it does, as the psychologist said, it will mean a reintegration with the unconscious mind. They're right. It will mean a re-understanding of what the ego is. It will mean a revisioning of what masculinity and femininity is in its purest sense. It's not the same as male and female. It will mean a falling in love with the word no. It's my favorite word. It has so much power, right? And it also means discovering that death is in life, every second, every minute, and embrace it, love its action on your life. By the way, it's going to happen to you whether you like it or not. You can resist it as much as you want, and then you'll have the cancers, and then you'll have the other, harder permutations of it, until you learn to go with it. Do you remember the very final scenes in the movie Dune by Frank Herbert wrote the book, but they made the movie? Mm-hmm. The very last scene is iconic for me, because just as the Sting character is about to knife the prince, you hear his voice saying, "And I shall bend like a reed in the wind." And immediately there's this Bruce Lee zip, right, flips, and boom, just like magic. He turns it around. And that's that mutability and flexibility and sort of a Taoist Zen way. The Hopis say, let go of the banks of the river, it's all right. Let go of the oars, the boat knows where it's going, and certainly the river knows where it's going.
I love
we
that
spoke
saying.
about this before, right?
Yes.
So this is the challenge that people need to let go. My message to them is when you realize it's a lie, it's easy to let go. If you offer the monkey, there's in India, the monkeys, they come and they try to put their hand into the clay pots to grab the food, and they're so greedy that even when people are beating them with sticks, they won't let go.
Right.
They'll just hang on, no matter how many
and their fists can't make it back through the hole.
When you bring a bunch of more gooey looking sweets, the hand releases immediately, and it goes for the thing. That's all it is. Yeah. Realize that you are holding on to something that's absolutely rotten. It's again in the movie Dune, where the priestess, the sorceress, makes the prince put his hand in the fear box. To scare the bejesus out of him, think it's all in the head, right? Yeah. So when we realize that what we're avoiding is selfhood, which is golden, which is wonderful, which is who you are and who you're meant to be, the hand will release from the false. But trying to jackboot it out, philosophize it out, cajole people, that will never work, because that's not the way the hardwiring is. You offer something better. Detachment is created. The gooey plate of sweets. Yeah, the gooey plate of sweets, which is the selfhood, and it's mitta. They call it in Indian the mitti, soma, but of a different kind, the real thing, right? Not very in the Vedas, it's there. Yes. It's in the Vedas, it's there. When he sits down under the tree, he finds himself, and he finds that the rivers that flow are his breath. Right, the trees that grow are his eyes. There's a whole metaphor where he becomes one with everything around him. And to use like Drumvalo, Melchizedek's, parlance, the Merkaba aura is not your personal aura. Nature herself and all the universe is your personal aura. You own it. It's you. She belongs to you, you belong to it. That's the symbiosis of chemical wedding. When we realize that's what we're heading towards, automatically you're Truman, and you just open the door in the sky and go, take it easy, guys. Your control doesn't work anymore because I've been immune. I'm immune now to every element of control. You can't control me because I'm immune. Bruce Lee would say, when I become so invulnerable to your kicks, I've won. It's the principle of Aikido. It's the principle of Jeet Kune Do. You become so immune to the virus that the virus dies of its own thing. The parasite drops off because there's no power of you. Fighting the virus is exactly what the virus wants. Remember in Fifth Element, the more you shoot at the star, the bigger it becomes? Yes. They're telling us this. The more in Zardoz, the beast we've conjured in our midst. Why did we conjure the beast in our midst? Instead of fighting it, you ask, why did it get created? So let go of the banks, let go of the reeds on the banks, let the river take us. Right, and not everyone can do that. I'm not the fool. I'm a realist. A lot of people can't do that. My advice is then don't try to save them, because you'll be dragged down with them. I really mean this. I know it's horrible to say and people don't like it, but unfortunately it's not going to become a living fact, because the vampiristic kind of person who's not done their homework, spiritually, meaning sociopathic kind of creature, the first thing they're going to grab onto you, like a Klingon on Captain Kirk's foot, right? Dragging him into the abyss along with himself. And going back to women, we can be really bad at trying to pick up anybody. Everyone can be. Everybody can be. And so we don't need to be doing, I'm really clear on that. It took a few years to really get it. But I get now, there have been enough signs, there's been enough energy to move us in this direction that we need to understand it's up to us. We really need to, in essence, transform ourselves first. Right? Yeah. That's it. Yeah, but to do that, there's a divorce required to dispense with other teachers in the hard sense. Yes. They're only guides. And remember, what they speak is their truth. No matter how holy it sounds or how demonic it sounds, one thing you must know, it's their reality.
Yeah.
They're speaking for themselves. They are guides, but they can't walk the topography for you. You must do the adventure yourself. You must go. And as Professor Tolkien showed in his masterwork, even the lowest rung of the ladder, the most insignificant person, can do what the highest sorcerers and wizards cannot do. So it was a metaphor. So, and he was saying, don't beat yourself up. You know, realize that, because remember when in the story, when they're chosen to carry the ring, they can't believe it.
Yes.
They're thinking there's a mistake here. You got the wrong phone number here, right? And yet he's saying, no, you're the little ones who can get through, right? So it's a very complex metaphor, but it really represents the fact that the lowest person in society, as long as they realize who they are, their journey is also a realization that, remember, because I've said in all my work, do not think this is something external to you. All these challenges and obstacles that come up are there because it's part of your journey. It's not like, oh, I didn't realize this was happening to me. I've just learned that there's a big brother operating in the world. What am I going to do about it? It's not an external activity divorced from your personal life. Oh boy, I wish I could change the channel, you know. This is your spiritual life. This is the matrix of control into which you're born. You're to find the answer to that Gordian knot. You're to break the matrix if you can, right? And instead of, my message is, instead of going outward, you must turn within. That's where the secret is. It's within your own selfhood that the secret, lies.
Michael, this wasn't the conversation I had anticipated having with you when we first met a couple days ago, but I am thrilled because this has been beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
It's always good to talk to you.
And vice versa.
See you too.
For more of Michael's work, you can go to Terrascope.com for his vast array of knowledge on esoteric subjects from occult astrology to defining the dynamics behind the architects of control. You might also want to watch our previous interviews with him on the Irish origins of civilization. To continue looking into the reemergence of the feminine, you might also enjoy my interviews with Dr. Christine Page and Lucia Renee on Unplugging the Patriarchy. Until next time, thanks for watching CMM.